We've entitled our message this morning, You've Been Called to Use Your Talents. How many of you here have a talent? Now, this isn't a trick. I'm not trying to trick you. How many of you have a talent? At least one. This is going to be a long sermon. Anyhow, we all have something that we can do. We all have something that we might be noted for. And if you don't think you have a talent, ask around to some of your friends. They'll know what your talent is. And talents can come in many different ways. But this is what we want to use as a theme this morning. John, the 17th chapter, verse 4 says, I have brought you glory on earth by finishing the work that you gave me to do. I'm glad I have these written down up here because I can't read the sign up there. Maybe I can. Anyhow, but bringing glory to God by doing the work He has given us to do. So what we're saying here is, if you have a talent, use it for God. That doesn't mean that's all you ever do, is just use that talent for God, You have to live life. You have to be an example to other people. But what is your talent? What is it? When you do your job well, you bring recognition to the business or the company, or if it's your own business, you bring the attention to yourself, if you will, or you bring recognition, as we mentioned, when you do it well. But what happens when you do a job poorly? When I was a much younger man, I painted houses for a living. And some of you have probably done that from time to time, or painted your own house or whatever. But you know what I always disliked, because it made a bad light on me, is when I would do a poor job on a section of a house for whatever reason, and then somebody come out and said, look at this. Now, you feel terrible, don't you? So what do? We go back and we do it over again. We know that there are people out there, when we're in the work world and we're doing things like that, there are people out there that just come out just to pick. And I've had people do that when I've been out painting. They're just look way up there. Oh. I have to ask my wife. No, I'll tell you this story. My wife and I painted the church building back in Rutland, Vermont, some years ago. Now, those of you who have seen pictures of it, or maybe have been there, you know how large that building is. And you know how high it is. And it's so high up at the peak in the front that we had to back my van up, take our 32-foot extension ladder, set it up into the back of the van, and we could just reach it up there. And we got it all done, got down and took the ladder down and put it in, and we turned around. My wife said, look, right up there. So what did we have to do? Get the ladder back out, put it back in the back of the van, slide it up there, get up there, and no, that's not what we did. I left the ladder there. I said, I'm not going up the ladder again. If somebody else sees it, they can go up and do it. Now, that's really not the way it should have been done, is it? It's really not the way it should have been done. And that's when God looks at us and the way that we're using our talent. What is He seeing? Is He seeing that spot up there that we just missed? And so, we just won't worry about that. He wants us to do our job well. And we have been called by God to do a work. Mark the 16th chapter, verse 15 says, He said to them, go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. How many of you have ever gone all the way around the world? Anyone here traveled around the world? I'd like to talk about traveling. We've traveled a lot. And I've still never figured out how we traveled so much with as little money as we ever had. But I guess a lot of it was on faith. We drove to Alaska and back from Vermont two different times, and what wonderful things we see. But I'm getting off track here. But God says to go into all the world. How far does our world reach? Probably none of us here are going to go way up by let's not go to the North Pole. Let's go to the jungles of Africa. Most of us here probably never get there. But there are people who have gone there. There are people who have given their lives in the service of God in these foreign countries. But there are lots of times when we just sit back and say, well, I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't go door-to-door calling. I can't teach. I can't preach. How many of you here enjoy going knocking door to door and inviting people to church? How many of you like doing that? There's some people that like doing that, and God bless you, I don't like doing that, but I've done that. There have been places where I've preached where that is expected of me, almost to the point they want to know how many doors you knocked on this week. But that might not be your calling. Maybe your calling and your talent lies in teaching. Maybe it lies in singing or playing musical instruments like these folks that get up here. But Jesus said, go into all the world. So how do we do it? How do we do it? Just find your talent. Someone will help you find it. And not everybody has the same talents. 1 Corinthians, the 12th chapter, verse 4 says, there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in every one, it is the same God at work. It says there are different gifts, but it's the same Spirit, the same God. And if we go on in this, in verses 7 through 11, it just enumerates what some of the gifts are. But then we look in 1 Corinthians 14th chapter, verse 26. He talks about the various gifts, and he speaks of orderly use of them. And verse 33 tells us that God is not the God of disorder. So how do we apply this today? Not all of us have the same talents. Not all of us have the same gifts. We'll probably repeat this a few times as we go through here. You'll have to hold on with me a moment. I lost my place. We need to use our talents for the glory of God and to edify the church. Sometimes just a smile. Do you know anybody that the first thing you think about when you think of them is their big smile? You know anybody like that? And isn't it amazing how a smile can light up a room? Just look at somebody and smile at them. And what happens? Most of the time, if you look at someone and smile at them, what are they going to do? They're going to smile back. And then you can get something going. As I'm talking about this, I'm looking around, I see smiles approaching or coming out on people's faces. And why? Because it's fun to smile. I used to know how many muscles it took in your face to make a smile, and how many muscles it takes to frown. It takes a whole lot more muscle to frown than it does to smile? Remember that if you want to give your face a good exercise. Just smile more often. And we need to allow God to use you in His way. Allow God to use you in His way. We can look at Moses in Exodus, the 2nd chapter. Moses was quite a guy, wasn't he? After he got rescued out of the river and got taken to a nice place to get educated and all this stuff. I mean, he had an education, he had station, he had home, he had wealth, and he'd become somebody in Egypt, even though his natural roots were back in among the Hebrews. And most people didn't realize that. But anyway, that's where he was. And he thought he was somebody. We've all run into people like that, haven't we, who really thought they were somebody. Well, okay, there they go again, trying to show off what they have. But here's a man that had it. And he thought he was somebody. And through all this, he knew his roots. He knew his beginning. How did he get that? Well, you remember the nursemaid that Moses had? Who was his nursemaid? His mother. Even though the people who allowed her to do it didn't realize that. But he was somebody. And then he realized, as he got older, that there's something going wrong among his people. They're being mistreated, and he didn't like that. You remember what he did? Remember the day he saw somebody beating on somebody else, and or saw an Egyptian beating on a Hebrew, and what did he do? He killed him. He killed him. There, I'm a hero now. I'm a hero. And the next day he goes out and he sees two of the Hebrew people fighting, and he tells them, "Look, you shouldn't fight like that." And what did one of them say? Remember what he said? "What are you going to do? Kill me like you killed that Egyptian yesterday?" Whoo! And what did that do to Moses? Well, he realized that something was wrong. He realized he was in trouble. So he took off. He took off. Now he's a fugitive. And you know what he did for the next 40 years? He was a shepherd. He was a shepherd. And somebody told me one time that the Egyptians loathed the occupation of a shepherd. They were the lowest of the low. I mean, you couldn't get any lower than a shepherd. And so here was somebody who thought he was something that became a nobody, and for another 40 years, he was a nobody. Did you ever feel like a nobody? We probably all have from time to time, haven't we? Haven't we? So for 40 years, he was a nobody. And what can God do with a nobody? What can God do with a nobody? Well, here for 40 years, Moses is, as it says in Exodus, the 3rd chapter, Moses was on the far side of the desert, tending the sheep of his father-in-law. It tells us that he was at Mount Horeb, which we would come to know later on as Mount Sinai. And so here he's been out here 40 years, learning all this territory, knowing all the ups and downs and the ins and outs and where the watering places were. He knew he knew it all. And one day he's out walking and he sees a bush that's on fire, and he gets closer and the bush isn't being consumed, and he's confused, and God calls to him out of the bush, said, "Moses, listen, I got something for you to do. I've heard the cries of my people Israel back in Egypt. I want you to go back and set them free and bring them out here." And what's Moses say? Moses says, "I'm a nobody. I'm a nobody." It's amazing how somebody becomes a nobody when they're getting challenged with a job that they don't want to do, when they're afraid. But God is ready to use him, and he tells him to go. Tells him to go back to Egypt. So he goes back to Egypt. We know the story, don't we? We're back to Egypt, and then he led his people out of Egypt back into the land that God had just let him wander around in for the last 40 years. So he knew the land well, knew where the feeding grounds were. For 40 years, God was preparing him to do things his way and not the way that Moses wanted. I just hope that it doesn't take God 40 years to shake us loose and shake us some sense into us. He went from confidence to cowardice and back to finding the courage that he needed to do what God wanted him to do. The Bible calls him the meekest man in the world in Numbers, the 12th chapter, verse 3. So as we look at this, how do we apply this? You know, what is your talent? What is your talent? If you don't know, guess what? There's somebody around you that does know. There's someone that's been paying enough attention to you, they say, you know, you can do this. You can do this. I know you can do this. I've seen the way you work here. I've seen the way you work there. You know, people will do that. I was, as a youngster in high school, believe it or not, I used to run cross country in high school. Now, don't I look like a cross country runner? I wasn't a good cross country runner, but I ran cross country. And we would go on these fairly long trips, and we didn't have a big cross country team. We usually went in a van. And the guys would be starting to sing something, and I'd sing with them, and I'd tell them stories and whatnot. And one day, maybe it was even during a practice, but our coach, our cross-country coach, was also my U.S. history teacher. And he came to me one day, and he opened up our history book, and there was a poem in the history book, kind of a goofy poem. And he said, Dennis, I've been listening to you on the bus, and I know that you have a good memory, praising me all up to. I want you to memorize this poem and quote it to the students in class. I didn't even think to say, well, am I going to get an A for the course? But anyhow, he noticed that. You want me to quote the poem to you? I hope not, because I don't remember it. It was called Abdul the Bulbul Amir. That's the name of it. No, it wasn't. Never mind. That was the guy's name. But anyway, God spent 40 years preparing Moses. Then he brought them back, and for 40 years, he did what God wanted him to do, the way that God wanted him to. Yes, he made some mistakes, didn't he? And he paid for the mistakes that he made. But what a change there was in Moses. What a change there was. Back some time ago, when I was younger, as we talk about people knowing what your talent might be. Do any of you remember singing the song, "If the Lord makes you a plumber, be a plumber for the Lord. If the Lord makes you a drummer, be a drummer for the Lord. Because if the Lord has need of drummers, he has need of plumbers too." And then again, I forget how all the rest of it goes, but just look around, see what you have for a talent, and use your talent. And if you don't know what it is, find somebody that knows what it is. And it's amazing when you let God work the way that he wants in your life. Colossians, the 3rd chapter, verse 23, says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord and not for human masters." Whatever you do, do it like you're doing it for the Lord. go back again to painting houses, And sometimes I had to stop and think of it. Sometimes I just wanted to get this house done. Then you think, well, am I doing this the way that God would want me to do it? Are we doing it the best that we can? We need to have a proper spirit and a proper attitude about your talent. Not a proud and arrogant attitude, because, hey, look how well I can paint. Look what I did. Look at the job that I did. Or listen to how well I can sing, or listen to how well I play this musical instrument, or this talent or that talent. We don't do it like that. Not doing it like that, but do it the way that God would have us to do, to bring Him glory. Because we don't all have the same talent, do we? We don't all have the same talent. Told in 1 Corinthians, the 12th chapter, that there is one body and many parts, and all have a purpose and a job. Do you ever look at your body and everything that's on your body and say, what good is this? What good is my little pinky? What can it do? I tell you what happens with my little pinky. It always ends up in the wrong places, like in car doors or anyway. But God says, or God wants us to use our talents. Don't be jealous of someone else, but be an encouragement. Guess what? That might be your talent. Your talent might be encouraging people. We all know somebody, don't we, that we just love to be around because they're such an upbeat person and they're always pumping you up and saying good things about you. And we like to be around those people. Or maybe you are one of those people. But what happens if we don't use our talent? Remember the parable of the talents that Jesus mentioned in the 25th chapter of Matthew? He gave each one so many talents. How did he give it? According to their ability. According to their ability. And what happened? Well, one guy doubled his, and the other guy, what did he do? You remember? Went and buried it. Went and hid it. I've tried oftentimes to think, why would he do that? Why did he do that? Why did he go and hide his talent? And then it really doesn't matter why he went. But what matters is the outcome. The outcome. What did the master say? He said, you're wicked, you're slothful, you're lazy. Take away what he's got and throw him out. I don't think there's any of us who would want to be standing before God and God say, how come you didn't use your talent? And are we going to say to God, well, God, you didn't give me very much. No, I gave you what you could deal with, what you could handle. And that's what you should have used. That's what you need. Because sometimes we get jealous of other people. And so we don't want to do anything. Or sometimes we just don't do it because it's not very important. So I'm not going to do it. How many of you like mopping floors? Is there anyone here who likes mopping floors? It's not very much fun, is it? You know how many floors I have mopped in my life? I ran a janitor service for I don't remember how many years. I worked as a custodian in a school for a while. I know what it is to mop. Now, just because I say that, don't come ask me to come to your house and mop your floor. Anyway, but we need to use our talents that God gave us and not worry about other people. And this man that we just talked about that only had one talent, what happened to his talent? It got taken away. It got taken away. So where do we bring all of this together? Where do we bring it together? We do it by asking the question, how are you going to use your talent? How are you going to use your talent? Are you going to bury it? Are you going to ignore it? Are you going to try to do things your own way because you don't like that talent? You're going to go do something else? Or are you going to spend, as Moses did, spend some time on the far side of the desert and say, okay, God, if that's what you want me to do, I'll do it. I really don't want to do it, but God, I want to be pleasing to you. I want to do what you want me to do. And do it with all your might. Letting God use His way. So what is your talent? What are you going to do with your talent? Each one of us has been given a talent. Each one of us has been given a directive. And one of those directives is we need to reach out to other people. We need to let our light shine. And we all sang that chorus as a youngster, didn't we? This little light of mine, what are we going to do? We're going to let it shine. And don't do what? Hide it under a bushel. No, we're going to let it shine. Are we going to let our light shine? Are we going to let people see Jesus living in us? No, we may not have superb talent in a lot of things, but you let God use you in the way that He wants to use us.